Nature Works podcast. Conversations with extraordinary guests who are working to protect, regenerate, and better understand the natural world. With your host, Mike Weeks.
In this episode of Nature Works podcast, I speak to the legendary Simon Temple. Simon's a sailor, a surfer, a freediver, a salty dog of a spear-fisherman. He's also an avalanche survivor and world-renowned cameraman with skills for telling a great story, as you'll hear in this conversation. Also, we talk about many wild adventures, including heli-skiing guiding in Canada, Alaska, New Zealand and Austria, sailing in the Pacific on a traditionally built rope and wood boat, which, from the sounds of it, almost fell apart, or at least seemed like it would, as well as Simon's career path of working on movies such as The Lord of the Rings. We go deep into how we can develop an even deeper connection to nature. And Simon tells a story of, albeit a strange tale, of an ocean navigator who uses his testicles to detect ocean currents. Yes, you heard that right. Someone who uses his testicles to detect ocean currents. Figure that one out. If you enjoy this episode and others, please share with other folks who are like-minded and give a crap about the natural world. This podcast is free of sponsors or advertising, and we aim at all times to provide honest and unbiased insights into how we can help protect, restore, and for goodness sake, we have to do this now before it's too late. Regenerate the natural world. That's the first time I've heard the jingle as the intro to the podcast. And it's also the first time I've done a podcast with a dog licking my feet under the table.
There's a lot of firsts in the room today, Mike.
There's a lot of firsts in the room, and not least of all the fact that it's taken us, I think, over 24 hours to set up the lighting, to set up the multiple cameras, to get this camera, which is a fancy camera, all set up and on the right settings. And that's because you're the first real expert in all of this stuff that I've actually had in the podcast room.
I think there's also a little bit of island style thing going on here too. We had an electricity issue where Mike got electrocuted the day before next door, and we had to come in and rewire the place for us to be able to sit here today. So
yeah, there were people rewiring in both parts of the office at 10 p.m. last night. So it's taken a bit of an effort to get here, hasn't it?
Yeah,
I like it though. It's all of a sudden, it feels good. Although one thing that people listening or viewing this won't know is that the aircon's not working very well either. So we're both going to end up with sweat dripping down our brow.
It's nothing to do with the questioning, I assure you.
No, indeed. Well, you don't know that yet, do you? You don't know that.
Let's find out.
So I don't usually go off on notes and things, but the problem is that some people, you meet them and you find out about their backgrounds bit by bit. And I've known you for nearly a year now, haven't I? Yeah. Sort of just interactions here and there and coffees and the likes. And I didn't know that you'd been a ski guide. I mean, I know that you're a very, very high level director of photography, but didn't know you'd been a ski guide. Didn't know that you'd spent months on boats and sailing and surfing and all this different stuff that we're going to go through here. So these notes are really just to remind me of your extensive career and background. But the first thing I'm going to ask you about actually is something that you were telling me about the other day. And I think it's a nice opener because this podcast is mostly about environmentalism and conservationism, but it's also about nature and our relationship to nature. And my actual real intention for this is to interview people who give me the opportunity to feel closer to nature. I used to go when I lived in Los Angeles, I used to go into the Patagonia store, not to buy anything, but to walk around and feel closer to nature through all their imagery and all of their clothing that's so natural. And my wife would be like, "Oh, did you get your fix today?" You know, might come back with a cup or something, because everything's so bloody expensive in there. But that's what this is about. And your stories, and because we've had so many of them, we've had last 6 nights or something having dinner together and the likes, and your stories make me feel closer to nature, but there's parts of nature I don't want to feel closer to, and that first part of that is avalanches. We'll talk about your career and all that stuff in a minute, but I want to know what it's like to be caught in an avalanche.
Wow, start with the big ones.
Exactly.
Well, I'd done a lot of research training as a guide, and it's something I always wanted to do, and I'd been one of those foolish haphazard cross-country skiers, or backcountry skiers, should I say, and and I'd gone out there and seen stuff fall around me and not really knowing what it was like. When I started reading about it, I thought, God, it sounds quite horrible. You know, it happens very fast. Some of these powder avalanches can move 200 kilometers an hour. And you have this experience of, it happens very fast, you know, very, very fast. And you kind of have this experience of helplessness because everything starts to kind of cement around you. You go into the white room, you get really disorientated.
What's the white room?
We just can't see anything, you know. You know, as the world starts to slow down, literally in seconds, you're frozen in one place. And, you know, I'd read about it, and I'd read about things before which had happened to people in this one book called Avalanche Accidents in Canada since 1998 at that time, you know, when I was involved in the training. And it was a horrible bedtime read.
I was going to say it's a cheery book.
Yeah, virtually everyone in the book dies.
Yeah.
There's no heroes. And so, but you read about how they died and how many people died and what happened, what was the snow like that day. And so you start to get an idea of where not to be. And I was in the wrong place. So I was in what's called a Class 3 avalanche, where a bowl ripped out and sent me into a terrain trap over a waterfall.
So explain what a bowl is in the terrain trap, because there'll be
Right.
people here who've never been in the mountains.
Sure. So basically, from the very top of the mountain, there was as the mountain goes to a peak, there's kind of a saddle between the next peak, and inside that saddle is a bowl of snow, and it's a catchment of snow, and so that's where the avalanche was forming. Basically, as a big, bad, dangerous layer on top of a weak layer, and it just needed somebody of about my weight to break that layer as I was traversing across that bowl to get to the next place I wanted to ski. And so I traversed across that, and I could hear this whoomphing sound, which is where you get this hollow sort of sound. It's like woof. You can sort of go, oh gosh, that's the weak layer collapsing underneath me. And I had a friend with me at the time, my girlfriend at the time actually, and I said, you stay here because I don't trust this slope. And I tried to beeline for this ridge or this rocky outcrop where I thought it would be safe to kind of check the snow again, because by that stage I was already partway across the slope, so I wasn't going to just go backwards. And I'd read actually that the people who survive the most are the ones moving the fastest
When it takes off.
Yeah.
So you're racing the avalanche.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, basically it's like a conveyor belt. So if you're moving really fast, and you're not going to match the speed of an avalanche, but basically you kind of stay on top of this conveyor belt, as much as you can. The last thing you want to do is be buried deep. The people that are buried the deepest are the ones that perish mostly. The deeper you are, the less chance you have of surviving.
Because it's going to take longer to find you. There's everything else, yeah. Because you can still die a foot under the surface, of course, but people are going to find you easier and dig you out quicker.
That's right. And sometimes you may even sense the light or sense which way's up. You might not be able to do anything about it, but at least you get an idea of where you are in relation to the top of the snowpack. So I started going across. I could hear the whoomp, and then the slope behind me ripped out, and I could hear this thunderous crack, And then I realized that slope's going to join the slope I'm on anytime soon inside this bowl. So I decided to just point it straight, registering that fastest people get a better chance of survival. And I pointed it straight, and there was a waterfall there, and of course I didn't see the landing, but I just knew I had to go off it because I was just trying to get out of this thing. There was nowhere else to go. There was rocks either side of it. There was just nowhere else to go. So I just shot off this waterfall, and I have no idea what size it was. I don't want to brag about it, but it may have been 10 meters. And I landed inside the bowl. I managed to land on my feet, and as I was literally straight lining down this bowl, the whole slope came up over top of me, and then set off another avalanche in the slope that I'm on now. And that's when it happened. I was in the white room, and it just happened so fast. Like I must have been moving the fastest I've ever moved, and I was very disorientated. Couldn't see, or feel which direction was. I couldn't even tell how fast I was going.
So you can't see if you're heading towards boulders or trees or anything. You're just going flat out as fast as you can down the mountain to try and stay at least a similar speed to the avalanche. At
this stage, yeah, because the slope had started to move underneath me quite fast, I couldn't actually ski anymore. So now I'm kind of sat down, because there was no way to sort of stay on my feet.
Tea and biscuits?
Yeah, it was definitely tea and biscuits would have been quite nice at that stage, you know. But I wasn't really scared or anything like that. I just thought I could just get away with it, and eventually it might just be a little wee, slough, and it all clear, and I'd be sort of, have some avalanche debris around me, and I could just sort of brush it off and keep going. But and then what happened was I got this experience, and I call it the worm, where I had snow forced into my throat. And as the avalanche starts to pack together, it's going down the waterfall and filling up this valley. It's starting to condense together and turn to, kind of more or less concrete. It's like a slurry of concrete. And it's just finding its way into things. And it was finding its way into my mouth. So I was coughing up snow, 3 or 4 times. I remember just coughing up this snow which was trying to ram its way into my throat. And then I sort of did 3 arm movements, and then that was it. I was locked. And I couldn't.
What position were you locked in? And by locked, you mean the snow all of a sudden all comes to a stop and it compacts, and it compacts with you in it.
That's right, yeah. And so I kind of waved my arms and tried to kind of stand up a couple of times, and then that was it. I was just frozen, and I managed to get one arm sort of in front of my face, which is the other thing that you're told to do, is to try to create an air bubble, and you'll survive a bit longer.
And goggles and stuff over your face, isn't that one of them? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, funny enough, I had everything on, so nothing really came off. I don't remember actually if anything came off goggles-wise. I think I definitely had my goggles on. Strangely, they should have come off first. And that was it. I was there. I was, and I could just wiggle my fingers inside my gloves and wiggle my toes inside my boots, and that was all I could do. I was encased.
For how long? What happened?
So I had enough time to think, okay, this is it. I'm now in an avalanche and I'm stuck. And I got a slight little panic surge. And then I started just feeling sorry for my parents that I hadn't been able to say goodbye, and that I might have just killed my girlfriend. And, that's a pretty dramatic thing to have to go through. And I started feeling to myself, I hope I just die fast. I hope it doesn't hurt, and I just sort of just asphyxiate and just pass out. I knew that there was no way to find the surface because I just couldn't move inside the snowpack, And so I had an arm slightly in front of me, and I created somewhat of a bubble, but I couldn't tell how much of a bubble. So I didn't know how long I was really going to survive, and I knew that if I just kind of took some deep breaths and really breathe really slowly, then maybe it would just help me to settle into death. Yeah, I thought it was it, basically.
And then an angel appeared.
And then an angel appeared. A French guy had seen me actually from the chairlift, and he had managed to, I think, jump off the chairlift, I heard later on, and ski across the slope. And he kept an eye on me, and he went straight to the position where I was, and he started digging, and he found me. And I was only a foot, I think, or maybe a little more below the surface. But the amount of snow that I was sitting on would have been about 5 meters. So I was actually really lucky to be on the top of it. And he was a French guy, and he basically got me out. And he got me out with my head first, luckily. And then he started speaking really bad German to me because I was in Austria. And so he was asking me, is there anyone else in the slope? Is there anyone else on the slope? And, I didn't really speak very good German at that time, and I was just really grateful, obviously. But at the same time, as soon as I came out, I was really keen to find Emily. So I managed to kind of dig my way out, and I remember pulling a muscle in my shoulder, just frantically trying to get, once my one arm was out, just trying to get myself out.
Like a wild animal caught in a trap, huh?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Did it put you off skiing?
Not at all. Not at all, but I'd also been involved in a lot of adventure sports where I'd had many crashes before, and I'd always go back to the place of the crash and try to figure out what happened. So I was very curious about that, and it's right, next time I come off my mountain bike, I'm not going to let that front wheel do that thing again. Where did that happen? And then I can go, see, I was the idiot, and I did it. It wasn't the something out of my control. And as long as I knew that I was the reason for it, then I could not be the reason for it next time, So that's what I did, is I went back to the place where it started to propagate the avalanche, and I worked out what had happened. and it made me feel much better about it. And I was back. I think I took a day off. But at that stage in that year, there was a few avalanches and there were a few deaths. And every year in the Alps, there's many deaths. And also every year in the Alps, there's many people turning up that don't know about the deaths and get killed. So it's just one of those tragic things about powder skiing. Of course, it's the best thing in the world when everything's going well, and when you see the nice fluffy white stuff, you never think about the tragedies and the potential hazards. And if you do, you probably wouldn't enjoy yourself out there.
So you've done literally hundreds or thousands of helicopter flights as well, and flights up into the mountains. Spent probably most of your life in wild places, haven't you, from the sounds of it?
Yeah.
You're typically not doing your work in studios, as opposed to being out doing docus and the likes. But how long were you a mountain guide for?
So I started training when I was at university, and I started guiding while I was at university too, just here and there, little bits and pieces. And that would have been in 1998 to start with. And then I think I was qualified with my ski level 1 in 2001, so that was 3 years later. And I'd already started doing some tail guiding for a cat skiing operation in New Zealand. And so I was very lucky to get a job, actually. It's very tough to get jobs as a guide. So I was lucky to get a job there. And then I actually moved to Wanaka, which is like heaven on earth.
It's gorgeous down there. It's unbelievably beautiful.
It is.
And clean and pristine and just, you can see why Lord of the Rings was shot in New Zealand. Because it looks like a world before garbage and eyesores blighting the horizon.
It really is. It's especially Wanaka, it's just gorgeous. And the people as well, it's lovely to be in a town full of adventurers, and for me, and I always even feel this way, even in cinematography, is that I still feel like a rookie, which is quite a nice thing to feel, There's just so many legendary people out there. And in Wanaka, there was just all these legendary people, and I think that's why I really started having mentors, looking up to people, There were these people that you just go, wow, that guy is such a strong climber, he's such a strong skier, that guy can do anything. And he usually gets the hottest girls in town too.
Did you? Always worthwhile, unless that's not your thing. Did you actively go and engage with those people and ask to be mentored, or did you just hang out around them and model?
I was a bit of a tire kicker for sure. I wanted to be around the guides, and I was pretty young and probably stupid and asked the wrong questions to start with. Funny thing is I actually noticed that some of the guides were very serious. It was, and I thought it was this fun job where you could just like romp around with people and have a good old jolly.
And with their lives in your hands, isn't it?
Well, I didn't know that at the stage, I just thought being a guide was just about being outdoors and having fun, and allowing people to find themselves out there and using the wilderness as therapy, and what better job in the world is there? And then I realised that actually, especially mountaineering and especially heli-skiing, is very dangerous. And you're holding people's lives in your hands, and very quick decisions have to be made on the way up. Sometimes you're in a helicopter and you've got 2 or 3 minutes to decide which run you're going to take just by looking out the window. And there's people talking and being excited and stuff, and you've got to kind of stay composed. And I noticed these people were very serious, and then you realise that as you get further on in your career, that it is a very serious job, and you've sometimes got to have a stern face to hold the leadership role and make sure that people trust in you as well.
Massive responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stories that you said about people not listening to you and then making massive errors.
Yeah.
Turning their legs around the wrong way, facing the opposite directions. And look, I actually thought about becoming a mountain guide in my early 20s, because one of my mentors and very close friends, Steve Monks, who is a legend he's British, he's from Bristol, from where I came from, and he encouraged me to become a guide when I was in my early 20s, because I didn't know what else to do apart from go rock climbing. But when I looked at the amount of work and time that I'd have to spend ice climbing in the mountains, that put me off, because I just wanted to climb in the sun. But the appeal of having a career in the most extreme, raw, and also the most wild of places, that's the bit that appealed. I didn't particularly want to take people up mountains. I wanted to be in the mountains. And I imagine that's the case for a lot of mountain guides, right? It's not just that you want to be giving people an experience. That's a bonus. You want to be up there every day rather than being on a tube in London or commuting into work or even working in an office.
That's
that
right.
ability to be, especially if you're in the southern, in the New Zealand Alps or something like that, it's an incredible way to spend your time. And the reason I mention that is because I'm curious as to what you think compels people to be in those places. It's dangerous. I mean, we learn how to navigate danger, but a lot of people don't make it that far without breaks or sprains or worse, death. My own wife, who in the first year of her climbing nearly died in a climbing accident, from an era of thinking that she was more experienced than she actually was in her first year, because she's climbing with all these pros and experts, and then she goes off on her own for her first ever climb with somebody who thought she was more experienced, and the rest is 5 operations on her wrist and helicoptering out and all of that sort of stuff. But what do you think it is that, with all your experience with people, both through guiding and also making documentaries and filming in wild places, what is it that compels us to be in these situations and places?
It's a very good question, and that's something that I was interested in my studies at university too, actually. It's just seeing what motivated people to be in the mountains and take up leadership roles in the mountains in particular, or in the wilderness, should I say. One thing I did observe is that it usually starts with a passion, people wanting to be out there and challenge themselves. I think that what I observed was there are people that just want to climb, and they use guiding as a way to keep climbing, so they can get paid, and basically it's almost like the job is just a way for them to continue doing their climbing career instead of the job being the career. And I think those guides find it particularly maybe a little bit harder to guide people because they get a bit impatient. These guys are like topping out on really hard climbs on the weekends, and then they're having to take clients up really easy climbs, in the weekdays. So they probably don't have that kind of patience level. Then you get another sort of guide who just wants to be in the mountains the whole time, and they actually really like when people get a kick out of being out there. So that's kind of different motivations. For the real soloists and the real purists, they don't often make the best guides, my belief. You can be both, for sure. It's a sliding scale. But those real purists are the ones who just want to go and tackle the big peaks and bag peaks, bag descents or ascents. And I think that's the purity, that sense of purity is where it comes from, is where the desire to be in the mountains come from. I remember being, the first time I kind of really experienced being in the flow of wilderness is when you come up to the top of a peak and all you hear is nothing else, and you don't hear anything.
I want to be there now.
Yeah,
I know that sound.
And you just look around and there's nothing except you, and you hold your life in your hands like quicksand, and you can make a decision which would kill you or take you down safely, and you start feeling immensely powerful, and it's like a locus of control, like I'm in control and I'm strong enough to be here, and I've granted myself, and you feel like super in control, but you're not depending on anyone else.
And nature doesn't care about the outcome either.
No.
Only you do.
That's absolutely. And then also being at the top of something, getting to the top of something is quite an achievement, especially when you're doing, getting up at 3 a.m. or even worse. Well, should I say worse, but a time where you have to get up and ascend before the sun hits the snow, before it gets dangerous. And then go through rocky crevasses and with your head torch only, and then get to the bottom of the mountain and climb. It's all quite exciting, and it's a huge effort. It really is. It's not for everybody, but when you get to that top and you top out, and you've got your hands in your life like quicksand, and you only hear that sound, you're like, wow, I did it. And then what I think happens anyway, is you come back down to the village, and nothing's a problem. For a while at least. It's not long lasting, but you're like, it doesn't matter if that guy just parked in front of me. I don't care if the internet's not working. Nothing becomes a problem.
It's trivial.
If people are around you that you don't really like anymore, you're like, yeah, it's no problem, just smile it off. I just climbed a mountain. you know.
Yeah.
And I'm really powerful and strong and able.
And I think there are many factors in that. And I read a study some months ago, so I won't be able to quote the specifics of it, but it was talking about how walking in nature, especially in forests, it has a beneficial therapeutic effect on people's health. And it's not just because you're cognitively enjoying the sight of trees and nature, although there may be some inbuilt identification of that pattern because that's where we've come from. But you've got all of these unseen elements, which is the pheromones coming from the trees, the communication signals coming from the trees and the plants, the smells that you're not even consciously aware of, and also the electromagnetic fields. Right now we're in this box, and we actually don't have Wi-Fi in our office, as you know, because I don't like the Wi-Fi electromagnetic field. The EMF in natural places is concentrated in a much different way to what you get in cities, where you have all of these non-native EMFs. Wow. And I mean, I'm never happier than when I'm high in the mountains, away from any cell signal, any sign of civilization, and the rawness of the wind, especially when the wind changes and you feel a temperature drop and you know something's coming on that wind, and you need to be alert to the fact that you've got a couple of hours to get back down, get to the top and get back down. And it's exactly these elements of going into wild places where you know you are taking full agency for your own survival, which is very rare in the modern world nowadays. It's, I mean, different here in Bali, where we ride around on motorcycles wearing helmets because we choose to, not because we have to, although it is a law, apparently, that you do have to wear helmets, but obviously it's not really enforced.
Damn.
Yeah, and people ride motorbikes here like they're in a fairground attraction, you know, where you're on the rails. So we have a certain amount of agency here, and we surf and the likes, but in most people's lives, there's a tight constraint. You get in a car, it's a safe car, it's got airbags, it's going to alert you when you're getting too close to the car in front, or you get on the train, and hopefully if you're living in a developed country, those trains are highly functional. Then you go into a safe environment. There's no fear, and then neither should there be, of any threat from the people you work with. Everything's safe, and it's all man-made frequencies, and it's man-made things in front of you. And then you plonk somebody in the mountains where all of that is blown away. And I don't like using the word too often because it's overused, but it's profound. It can be a completely profound experience. Even as I was listening to you there and talking about that and your great wind sound, I was taken straight to the top of one of the Colorado Rockies, which we lived in the Rockies for 3 years before we came to Bali. And I want to be there. It's like, I want to feel that rawness that you only get in nature. And it's that rawness for me that is so compelling, and I expect is the case for many other people.
Absolutely, and I think that rawness can be sometimes seen as an addiction for people who aren't climbers, who just see a climber who comes off a climb and immediately is planning the next one, because it's quite a feeling, you know. And you felt it then, and only a climber can feel it. That, you know, there's more to just explain than words. There's a feeling that you just can't explain in words, and where you're just speechless and you just take it in. And like you say, there's temperature drops, changes, everything. You can just feel everything, can sense everything. And similarly, when I was guiding, because I also guided cycle tours and hiking tours, and even wine tours, you know, I guided a bunch.
Now you're talking stuff. This mountain stuff. Let's go and do wine and cheese.
You know. And I guided with a guy who I really looked up to. His name's Jeff Gabbardies, and he was quite a famous New Zealander, and I really loved that man. And he had just amazing stories of climbing the Trango Towers and base jumping off it. You know, and I was like, wow, this guy's amazing.
That's a big deal, yeah.
You know, and he's an old school climber. He'd been around since the 70s, very strong climber, and this guy had calf muscles like tree trunks. It's the sort of guy that his stories, you just go, I just sit there and listen to Uncle Jeff, you know, talk about stuff. But he ran this company called Adventure South, and I got a real chance to guide people. So then I started having a different experience where I'd take people into the wilderness, just on hiking trails, and get to a trailhead or a viewpoint. And then I just like to look at how people absorbed that, you know, and what they felt, and it's so beautiful, became speechless, you know, all of a sudden. And for me, when you go to those places, that's how nature intends it to be. That's the perfect balance of everything. Right? There's no human intervention except for the trail you're standing on. And if you can just take that in for a moment and say, this is recalibrating, it's kind of this just feels like you're being kind of reset when you're there at that place.
Yeah, reset's a good way of describing it. Very much so. Yeah.
And you come back to the car and all of a sudden everything feels light and fluffy again. It's a real high. So I was kind of drawn to that as well, just that wilderness experience.
There's sometimes also the relief that you're still alive and that you can touch the car.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, I'm back in civilization, even if I still have 10 miles down a dirt track to get to. I'm in a car.
But the chocolate tastes better at the top of the mountain, even if it's really crap chocolate. The beer, which is a bad beer, will taste really good. Everything, all of a sudden, life tastes good.
Yeah.
Just from that wilderness experience.
So you spent a lot of time in the mountains, but you've also spent quite a fair bit of time on the ocean.
Yep.
You're a sailor, you're a surfer, you're a free diver, spear-fisherman, all that. And you worked in your main job for the last 15 years. You've been working in film and as a director of photography.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And you worked on this thing called I'm going to balls it up. Te Mana o Te.
Te Mana o Te Moana. That, which means it's like the charisma of the ocean. It's te is the, and mana is like a word meaning charisma. It can mean a lot of things, but it's the spirit or
that's Polynesian. That word.
Yep.
And you've got an adept ability to speak a bit of Polynesian, because I imagine it shares similar attributes in the pronunciation as Maori.
Yeah, it's Māori in New Zealand, and that's also through the Cook Islands and other small pockets. But the language is very similar. In Hawaii, they have a very similar sound, and even funny enough, in Indonesia here, the word for fish is ikan, and it's ika in Māori, and for the word for ear is taringa in Māori, and it's talinga here. So there's, I think that the Polynesians came from this area. And they've kind of
did
left.
They?
Yeah.
Is that a known pattern of movement that anthropologists or historians have?
Yeah, they said the sort of Maori came from the society in Marquesas Islands and potentially even Taiwan before that. So there's been a movement of
they grew in size.
Yeah, they did. They grew massively in size.
Because there are not many Indonesians who would match the average Maori.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, it was a southward migration. There were many migrations, and I'm no historian, but there were many migrations, and the ones that penetrated the furthest obviously got to New Zealand.
So the reason you speak Maori is because you're part Maori.
Yeah, my mum's Maori, and she has Maori heritage. And I grew up with, a few words here. We all grew up in school being able to sing a few songs and have a few words. And then later in life, I got a chance through university to be able to learn te reo and, just not to a place comfortably now where I could say I was fully fluent, because like any language, you need to practice it. And the amount of traveling I've done means I can't speak it all the time. But I understand more than I can speak. But it also draws you closer to the culture.
Well, as a Kiwi, you're still learning English as well, of course.
Absolutely, and I always cock that up, throw the odd expletive in there, and people are like, what the hell?
You're in the right place for that. But the charisma of the ocean.
We can say the spirit of the ocean. Maybe a better.
See what I did there? I didn't have to pronounce it again.
Yeah, you did it really well.
Tell me about that, because that was you've told me a few little anecdotes from that, and it sounds fascinating, but it's a completely different experience of being out on the wide open ocean, these guys who are navigating using just the stars and the ocean currents and the likes.
That's right. Yeah, I was very lucky to be a part of that, and to be quite honest, I came in at the end of it, and a director friend of mine asked me to come in and just fill in a few gaps on a lot of footage that was already shot. And we'd done some stuff on waka already. So the vessels are called waka, and they're basically these 70-foot or so catamarans, made of wood typically, but these particular boats on this voyage were made of fiberglass, and they were put together, the whole voyage was put together by a German philanthropist, Dieter, who was actually coming down to the South Pacific in search of the white whale after he sold his company and retired. and he had a keenness for the ocean, and he came down. And
is that a mythical white whale out of Moby Dick, or is there a white whale?
There is a white whale.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, and apparently he found it. Yeah, but I never got to talk to him
what
about
species? And what? Yeah, no. What brand of whale?
I think it was the whitest. I'm just going to make stuff up here.
Is it a blue whale gone white? Or is it
I honestly have no idea. I just knew that that's the reason he came down to come find this thing. And as he got down here, he found that these Polynesians were all landlocked, and the stories he had read of these great migrations and these incredible sailors over thousands of years rafted these things together made of wood and lashed with rope, and were able to go back and forth for thousands of kilometers just using primitive technology and mostly memory. So he said, well, I'm going to fix that. So he built, I think at that time maybe 7 or 5, a waka made of fiberglass but modelled traditionally, and then lashed traditionally with wood. So you have these 2 hulls obviously, and then you have these cross members that are lashed together in this kind of traditional pattern. And he's set together to make voyaging societies and then kind of reinvigorate the Polynesian seafaring culture. And by that stage, there was already a groundswell of stuff going on. The Hawaiians had a boat called Hokalea, and that boat had already made some navigations around the Pacific and already had a lot of press around it and some really sort of famed.
I think Patagonia have done a book on it, haven't they?
There's been a number of things done with.
What are you looking over there for?
There
was a flicker.
Oh
no.
And so
Moyan was falling asleep.
Right,
so my head nodding.
Okay. You good? You need a coffee?
I think we all need a coffee. Yeah.
And so this guy Dieter, he was quite wealthy, and he put together a sum of money, and I think quite a lot of money, like $20 million or something. He built these waka, and he gifted them to each of the Polynesian countries, or a number of countries, and said, "There you go for it." But it wasn't quite as easy as that, because there weren't people that really knew the knowledge. There weren't enough of them.
Right, they'd forgotten.
Yeah. There's a couple of Māori people who are very well known now, who had that knowledge and were starting to seed it out already. And there was a boat built by Hector Busby, and I've done work with him as well recently. He's now dead, but he's become very famous as one of the pioneers. And
he's Maori, is he?
Yeah.
Hector?
Yeah. And he had retired from his company and built his own boat, his own waka, and decided to do some sailing as well, and done some quite heroic adventures, and it was tied in with the Hawaiians as well. So with a couple of these known sailors, they'd managed to pull together a team of people to train up and these young navigators and start this voyage. And so the voyage was to go right around the Pacific and connect all the islands together, and then reach the west coast of the US and do a kind of a circuit, if you like.
What's the distance from there?
Oh, that's a really good question, Mike. I don't,
Come on, you're a sailor, aren't you?
Yeah.
Don't let me down now.
There's some huge distances out there in the Pacific.
Yeah.
You can get it wrong by a few thousand kilometres.
Especially when the wind throws you off course.
100%. So the voyage had more or less taken place, and I'd been, part of other trips involved in the Pacific. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I'm just doing the camera.
Just double checking.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
listening.
And then I was tasked to go out and kind of fill in gaps and interview some of the people that had been out there and put together this big show, because there was just thousands and thousands of hours of footage, and we'd gone out on some pretty big sailing legs. I was also involved in a couple of other shows with waka, so I'd sort of been on the boats already, and I'd fallen in love with them. Yeah.
What was it about them that?
Simplicity, I mean, we were.
Compared to what though? Because I'm not a sailor. I've been on sailing boats. I've spent 2 weeks on sailing boats, and I am captivated by it, but I don't know anything about it. So when you say simplicity, what, it has oars?
There's no screws in the boat. There's nothing screwed together. It's all lashed by rope. The tiller, if you like, is this thing called a hoi, and it's just a huge tree.
Tiller's the steering wheel, right?
Yeah, but it's like a huge tree that's carved out. So you're holding onto this tree, and it can just throw you like a bucking bronco across the deck, when it hits water. The sails don't have any winches.
So you've got to be strong to be the tiller captain.
Yeah, you've got to kind of let the ocean guide it, and then you can just kind of pull it at various times, and it takes a long time. Obviously, I struggled with that hoy for many hours when I was on watch, and then there's no winches, so everything's manually hoisted, and the sails are all manually stitched together, by hand, and so it just means that if anything goes wrong, you can fix it out there.
Got it.
To a point.
Yeah,
obviously,
you're not reliant on a piece of equipment that you ordered, especially that made of carbon fibre that cost $5,000.
Yeah, it has to be replaced, and you can't get around using it. So, so I mean, these things they're not overly. They don't have a massive sail plan. You can't go fast in them. You're not going to break records or anything like that. But they can go 7 knots pretty reliably. And
what about when there's no wind?
Then you're going backwards, basically, where you're just
waiting, just floating around.
And that happened.
Literally.
We sailed from New Zealand to Rarotonga, and
Rarotonga,
in
the Cook Islands.
Yeah,
I've been there.
It should have taken us about 13 days, maybe
you say it better though.
Rarotonga, yeah. And it took us 18 days, and we were out there for just some days just bobbing.
Really, just hanging out, just running out of water.
Just kind of like going, come on, wind. And there's no phone reception. There's nothing. You're just out there singing songs and listen to beats on your phone. Yeah, and filming. Of course, I was out there filming. Yeah. So
you were filming on the boats, and also having to take your turn at the tiller.
Yeah.
Is that normal, or is that just because you're an obsessed sailor?
No, it was just when you're on a waka, when you're on any boat actually, you're part of the steam of it. You've got to be every day. You've got to perform duties, and it might just be things like cooking and cleaning, just the general maintenance, and it just makes everyone's life easier. Unless you're a paying client, obviously, then you just sit back and enjoy the view. And then in between those times, I would, and obviously they gave me freedom to say, well, if I was on watch and something that needed to be filmed came up, then I'd just grab my camera, and they sort of gave me that opportunity to film. But there was no power. So on these waka, they're so simple. There's nowhere to hang out indoors except your bunk, which is literally a tiny little bunk. And on the top side, there's like this one very small hut where you have the charts there, and so you can sort of sense where we are. There's no electricity. There's a battery system which is run by solar panels, mostly for the solar engines which Dieter had invented, which were just amazing things, and they could just help get the waka in through narrow passage and into the reef systems and stuff. And we had a small generator for us for the cameras to recharge the batteries on the cameras and stuff. And that simplicity, going back to that simplicity, it just feels like you don't have any distractions, and you're just there absorbing every second.
Yeah, I am going to ask. When we're in the mountains, senses are tuned differently. They have to, because it's high risk, and because there's no distraction. And typically, the modern person, their senses are so dulled. I've lived in the Amazon rainforest for months on end, and with the Shipibo, who are some of the native indigenous people that live outside of Iquitos. And I've walked through the forest with some of these old shamans who are in their 70s and 80s. They literally don't know how old they are. They know that they're younger than 100 and over 70. But the way they walk through the forest, their senses are so attuned to such a different level of hearing. So I might hear a bird that's in the first 50 meters, and it's, but they're hearing beyond that 500 meters away, and they're picking up something. And I know, because I'm asking them as I'm going through, when you cocked your head like that, and they don't speak even Spanish, so I'm speaking through a translator. When you cocked your head like that to that bird, what were you hearing? And they're like, well, we weren't listening to that bird. We were listening to that bird. I'm like, oh, I didn't hear that bird. It was way too far out of my range. Not necessarily because my hearing's not as good, but it's not attuned to what's going on all the way over there. And they're sniffing and they're looking, and they're completely seeing the world in a different way. And I imagine I haven't spent a great deal of time on the ocean, but I would imagine over a period of time, you become attuned to the ocean in a different way.
That's right, and you know, for me, I've kind of, again, I feel when you go out on these adventures, people think, oh gosh, you've done so many adventures, you're a real adventurer. I'm like, wow, you should meet the people that I've been out there with.
Yeah.
I feel like pretty lame in comparison. And some of these navigators, and they're incredible. You know, they can put their hand in the water and sense ocean currents.
I was going to ask about this.
Right. And, you know, and they're sensing things that no one can. They can measure boat speed by bits of bubbles going by, and, you know, they see the clouds, the changes in clouds, and know exactly what's coming up. And just maintain real calm. You know, you're like, this thing is just lashed together with wood, and we're about to go into like force 7 on the Beaufort scale.
Did that happen? Did you go into a force 7?
I've been into some, and we went through some pretty big storms where
Tell us. What's the biggest storm you went through?
Well, there's one storm where we I basically woke up because I was levitating off my bunk and coming down, crashing down onto it.
That wasn't Carver you'd been drinking, is it?
No.
Before you'd gone to sleep?
Yeah, there's a funny story about that I'll tell you later too. And I was like, what the hell's going on? So I sort of popped up, and as soon as I opened the hatch, it smashed open. Right, and then I realised that, you know, there's probably like 80 knot gusts out there, and we would have had like rolling through a 12-metre swell. And what had happened was the last watch crew, as far as I know, and respect to any watch crew that are listening to this who were on that voyage, had kind of overpowered or put too much sail up. You know, there wasn't enough reef in the main, and because you're not using any mechanical advantage, it's just lashed. You know, just. Do you
want to explain what the reef is? Because I have a layman's.
Oh, I say sure. So a sail is, you know, when you have a mainsail, you can pull it all the way to the top of the mast, right? Or you can only pull it up part way up, and along the horizontal axis of the main, you've got holes where you can cleat the sail down, so you can only put half the sail up, or a part of the sail up, and that's called reefing.
So you go slower.
Yeah, so you just don't have as much sail up, and you're not getting as much wind. That's right. And what had happened is they'd had quite a lot more sail up, and it wasn't as reefed as much as it should have. And we got into the squall, which is a big storm system, and these gusts were, you know, crazy gusts. The sky basically had gone amber orange all around us, so there was this ominous kind of feeling of it. And I came up, and immediately I was just so excited. Because there was and then I got up, and there was 8 people on the hoy. There's 8 people.
Wow.
And they're just like, everyone's holding on, and where the solar engines were, there's these kind of wooden flaps on the deck, and they were just bursting open, and then like a 6-metre jet of wave would come pouring through that and just wet everyone, and people would just swim around the deck for a while and find their feet. And
were you all harnessed in?
Some of us were, and it was all happening very fast. And obviously the skipper Frank at the time, he was trying to get everyone, you know, poised and
in good order.
I mean, we could have so if anyone had gone over, there was goodbye. There's no way we could find them. Yeah. And I just remember coming up and just being so excited, you know, and looking down and seeing these waves that were like the size of the mast. So, and they were rolling through them. And all of a sudden you were just lost inside this monster water system, and then you come up to the other side of it. Now you're on the top of it, and you're about to go down the other side, and the thing starts shaking, and because it's lashed together, I could see the deck like piano keys just sort of, and they're just moving, and I was like, well, this is going to fall apart. You know, it's
wow,
it's going to fall apart.
I'm actually, that scares me. I'd rather be in the proximity of an avalanche than that, because it just feels so disconnected from everything that you value in the other world, your home, and like no one's coming for you, are they? No one. A helicopter can come into the mountains and help you out. No one's coming to you out there.
I remember feeling like, you know, there were people that were very scared because they hadn't been out there before, and you could just see the fear in their face. And I remember, even from my days of mountaineering, is being scared means that you would make decisions that weren't sometimes the right one, you know, and you're a bit tense and you'd make the wrong decision. So I just decided to put a smile on my face and just enjoy the ride.
How long did it go on for, the storm? Probably
went on for a good several hours, you know, and then Hotu. Hotu is an amazing skipper and navigator and orator of Māori tanga, Māori culture, and he was there in his Hotoroa Barclay Kerr, and he was our presenter on the show, and also the navigator. And I remember just looking at Hotu, and he's just leaning up against the deck, just going, "Yeah, cool, yeah, all right, nice, yeah, okay." and I just realised this man had seen quite a lot of stuff, but he just maintained this cool composure, and
that's what you need.
And I was like, "This is the guy I want to be around." And I was like, literally, Hotu, are we going to be okay?
Yeah. When he starts praying, that's when you know it's bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and Frank, of course, was concerned for everybody's crew, and he's the skipper, so he was, running around being a skipper and shouting at people and making sure that they're wearing their vests. I mean, a vest isn't going to help you, but we were trying to tie on where we could. Yeah.
What's the wildlife like when you're out in those places? I mean, are you seeing special creatures that you wouldn't anywhere else?
Well, the strange part about being in the open water is you see less than you do when you're closer to land, which is a really good reason to want to be part of efforts to save the sort of 25 nautical mile radius out from land, because that's unfortunately where such a huge part of the biodiversity exists. When you get further out, you get surprised by whales and dolphins, obviously these big mammals that go off and do these huge distances. You see less and less birds. The pelagic fish, you'll catch pelagic fish and see, some tuna and stuff, the ones that can swim the furthest away from land. But typically, it's very still out there. It's very quiet. It's like being back in the mountains. There's really just nothing.
It's so deep, isn't it?
It's so deep. Yeah.
Most of the life is in the first 30 to 50 meters of the. I mean, it's certainly with coral and the likes, and the coral is for many species is the home or the breeding ground, and the deeper you go out there, I guess it's either big whales or those freaky things that are all the way thousands of meters down below that haven't seen light in their entire lives.
Absolutely. So,
but you're going between islands and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And it was just for me having a navigator who's only navigating with the stars and the sun and using cloud systems. And then Hotu says, "It's going to pop up over there." I say, "What?" He says, "You watch. Rarotonga. Rarotonga is going to pop up just there." And then shortly enough, like a few hours later, just pops up exactly where he said it was. And I was like, how the hell? How
many days have you been navigating towards Rarotonga at this point?
We hadn't seen land for 18 days.
And so he's not got any GPS systems. Has he got maps?
We have charts. And the charts typically, I mean, we have in every vessel that goes out into the water, especially in big crossings and stuff, you have what's called an AIS system, and that's a locator so that the rescue systems people can find you or whatever, and other boats too. And you want to be able to see container ships. So if you're travelling in the night and you're going through a container alley, you want to be able to know where these boats are and stuff. So AIS is very important. So having a chart and knowing where you are on that chart, just so that you can register if you're in a shipping channel. The skipper would typically have hold of that chart, and he may use that to help some of the younger navigators to learn about the ocean and how far we've drifted and be able to explain that. So that's the main reason for the charts, but they're not needed. And Hotu could guide a vessel all the way from one place to another.
What's he doing? Because I've watched Moana twice with my kids, and there's a hand in the air making and I don't mean that disrespectfully. This is my only view of anyone. And I'm assuming it comes from some kind of credible piece, but they're literally shaping hands against the stars and, like you said, feeling the water and the currents. How are they taking the information in?
So if you hold your hand straight out in front of you, and there's a certain thing you can do with your fingers, you can basically that for most people anyway, it's 4 degrees between the two fingers. So if you hold your fingers out like this, and then so from there to there is 4 degrees, there's 4 degrees, and those in navigational culture are called houses.
God, that's got a lot of room for error, though, doesn't it?
It does have room for error, but what you'll do is you'll match up that finger against a star or the sun or a part of the horizon, which is further away. So that stays more or less fixed. So then you can put your thumb against that star there, and you can move across to there. Then you know from that there's 4 degrees, from there is 4 degrees. So then you go, and then you know from memory of the pattern of the stars that when you see that star, that means that in a certain amount of time, this one will pop up 2 hand shapes or 2 lots of 4 degrees, 8 degrees over here. So then you can now track how fast you're going with the boat speed, measuring the hull speed against how far those stars pop up. So there's a time between that star popping up and this star popping up. And then you're able to say, okay, well, we're going in this direction at this speed, just based on that. You'll be getting drift and all sorts of other things as well, and you'll have clouds where you obviously can't see, so you've just got to measure your boat speed. And when the stars come back together, you go, okay, there's that star. Oh, now we've drifted this far now. So you can.
And that's all happening intuitively. They're not writing down lots of notes.
No, it's all done by memory. Yeah,
that's incredible.
And they'll know the stars very, very well. And some of these master navigators, they just spend their life learning the stars, and then also they're looking at bird life and fish life, and they'll know by certain species how far away they are from the sea, because sometimes you can see a certain fish or a bird and you can't see the land, so you go, okay, cool, we're within landfall sometime, maybe a day or two. So that's kind of a first indication. And then the ocean currents, and that's where it gets a bit mystical, being able to feel the ocean currents, and I think there's only very few people that can sense that.
And I can't not mention it, but the first time I met you, or we had a coffee specifically to talk about your work, you sent me and my business partner Jake off, both in hysterics, and also I think we called BS on you.
Yeah.
Because you said that you knew of a navigator who used his testicles in the water to navigate the ocean currents.
Yeah, I must admit, many people have said that to me when I've recounted that story, and I was in Tahiti on another show, and basically it was a completely different show.
Which one?
It was we started off shooting a show on Whawhaite, which is the Tahitian waka making a trip back home to take one of the famous navigators who perished in New Zealand, and they were going to take the message back to New Zealand that they were going to basically redo that trip in his name, right? And to say that the Tahitians have arrived back to take this body, or at least participate in this journey. And sorry, Anna, out there, if I've got this slightly wrong, but it was great to be a part of that journey. And while we're there, we met a woman who had been on this documentary, and she was a very smart lady, and I think she might have been Dutch in origin, and she told us this story. And it was somewhere off near the Solomon Islands, and she said, yeah, I've got photos, and she showed us the photos of these fishing waka, so they're like smaller ones, and they have these kind of chairs at the back where the navigator sits and hangs his testicles into the water to sense the ocean currents.
Wait, how high are the chairs off of the water?
I don't know, or how high.
They've got really long testicles.
Yeah.
No, they're stretching them.
Yeah.
They're sitting on the base of the boat.
I mean, I was.
But you saw photos of the boats, or you saw photos of these elongated testicles?
No, I wasn't checking out if the testicles there, but I definitely saw someone sitting in this navigational chair, and then her stories of this, and she was keen to raise some funds to develop this show. And since then, I've been looking for that show, so she may not have developed the funds. Or maybe the guys in the chair weren't actually guys in the chair. Maybe they're women. Who knows? Although it wouldn't really work if it was a woman. So anyway,
I don't see how it would work with a guy. I mean, a man's testicles are typically quite sensitive, but just how sensitive for ocean currents? We're going to have to look that one up at some point.
I know, and
keep going on it.
Desperately keen to find. I've stopped telling that story as a result, just in case it never happened. But I did see the photos, and I was very intrigued.
It still amuses me, even like the 15th time I've asked you about it. So your job. Yeah, I mean, I know you work on commercials and you work on big movies. You worked on Lord of the Rings, you worked on Avatar and all of that, the big movies. But part of your job when you go into these places is to communicate through image and sound the experience of nature. and bring that back into people's homes. And I wonder whether how often do you ever get concerned about the more you popularise wild places, the more they become humanised, the more that people are coming into them. It's a bit like climbing walls. When I was climbing when I started climbing 32, 33 years ago, it was still such a niche sport. And I'd go to the local climbing area in the woods near my home, and there was almost no one there. There were whole days when you see no one. And if you see a school group come along once in a while, and that would be the big. Now you go to these places, and it's overrun. When we lived in the US, Joshua Tree National Park, the first time I went there, again over 30 years ago, there were hundreds of camping spaces all over the park available. Now you can't get a camping space for love nor money because there's just thousands and thousands of people appearing. And you have a responsibility as a cameraman who's capturing the wild, because obviously if you present that there's a treasure chest of experience and all of this amazing, incredible, wonderful, whatever it is, natural resources in these places, you're sort of giving it away, aren't you, to people? And I wonder whether you thought about that much.
I think if you're doing like travel shows, or your content is promotional, then you could be seen to be giving up some of these spots. But even so, people aren't going to. I mean, going to the wild requires a lot of resources, and some of the more far-flung places, they'll probably remain that way, and especially some of the places I've been to in the Sahara Desert or across the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and to go there is pretty hectic. It's not for the faint-hearted. You can't just get a latte whenever you want. In fact, you can't even get coffee half the time. So, you've got to go fully prepared, and it's an expedition. And I don't feel like those places, those ones that I've photographed, are in danger of becoming popularized anytime soon. Of course, a lot of the subject matter that I film is people in nature, so it's all about the people doing extraordinary things. And I'll go through some of these wilderness zones, and part of the show will be going through urban areas as well, and all sorts. So I've never really just focused on one area in my work. That would be more kind of the travel, shows. And
the flip side to my question actually is the opposite of what I've just said there, which is that rather than encouraging people to go into those places, and I had this conversation with a producer at the BBC who works in the natural history section of the BBC, and she said, look, we actually think that what we do is protecting nature, because if you've seen it on your screens, yes, a certain percentage will want to go there, but at some point people may even immerse themselves in VR, and that will be enough for them. And so it will protect those places from being overrun by humans. And also, you can't protect what you don't love. And so through cinematography and great storytelling, you can encourage people to love and be motivated to protect those places. And I
would love that job, actually, is to go and shoot VR. Where all I like to do is just go and enjoy myself with 4 cameras strapped to my head.
To you, yeah.
I'll be like, this is a great job. And then other people can enjoy what they're seeing at home, and then I don't have to tell stories. I can just ride around on a big old motorbike, or that'd be pretty fun.
Have you got favourite places from all of your years of travel and ski guiding and cinematography and the likes? Places that really you think about if you could just snap your fingers and go back to?
Yeah, it's really funny. I grew up in probably paradise on earth, and I didn't even know it. When you grow up in New Zealand, I grew up in a tourist town called Lake Taupo, and we had just a huge amount of adventurers there, and I just had no idea, because I thought my normal was just these people in this town. And so when I started traveling, I was like, wow, why is everyone so boring? To a point. I know that's not the right way to view life now, but and it was just when I first started out, I was like, why? And people would go, let's go to this amazing beach, and I'm like, that's not an amazing beach. I've been to the far north in New Zealand, or the Catlins in the South Island, and there's extraordinary beaches where you got whales and dolphins going by, and there's no one for miles, and these just rolling golden sand beaches. And then getting on the internet and saying the 10 best beaches on earth, and New Zealand doesn't appear in them. I'm like, that's great.
Then, New Zealand Tourist Board has done a great job there.
Yeah. So I kind of grew up really spoilt, to be honest. And so I must say that in all the places I've travelled, I sort of come back and go, wow, New Zealand's a pretty fascinating place, When it comes to favourite places now, I think as I've got older, my tastes have changed somewhat, and I've become a bit of a foodie. And so I've been to places where the food is disastrous, and it just makes you feel like the expedition has gone flat. You're like, I'm in this amazing mountain in Kazakhstan. I've been in Kazakhstan, and the food is god awful. In Mongolia, the food is just horrendous. But you obviously that quickly overcome that with this great sense of adventure, and if you're well prepared, and then you can take all your creature comforts with you. So I must say that now I sort of balance great places to travel with a certain amount of luxury. Maybe I'm just become a glamper.
Don't say that, my goodness.
Over the years,
that's the ultimate wrong direction turnaround from being a mountain guide to becoming a glamper.
I know. But there's something like that. And even in mountaineering and mountain guiding, you just take little luxuries and it becomes sort of something. Listen, I think being in the Sahara was an incredible experience because...
Which parts were you in?
Well, we travelled in from Morocco and all the way through Mauritania and across Mali and into Senegal. So it's a fair old whack north-south traverse.
What was that filming?
That was following or pursuing this eclectic British adventurer who had invented a flying car, and he wanted to go from London to Timbuktu in a flying car. So we started in London, obviously, and we flew across the English Channel, and then we drove across, Europe.
Does this thing float?
No, it doesn't float. No, it's more like a sand buggy with a paraglider that pops out. And
okay.
And
so it was a soft wing.
Yeah.
Not fixed.
Yeah. And then you sort of pack it away, and away you go again. And then I flew across the Gibraltar Strait. And into Africa, and then drove down through there, flying and driving through Africa, getting to checkpoints, and they're like, this thing flies across borders, doesn't it? And they're like, immediately go, we're not letting you through. So we had to go to another border and cut the propeller off and take all the stickers off the side of it. So
it looked like a car.
So it looked like a little
and then
car.
Put it all back on again.
Exactly. So, but the Sahara Desert was really amazing because, most people think of it as just a big yellow sand mountainscape. And it is that, but when you start to meet some of these nomadic Tuaregs, and they've got like 100 words for sand, different types of sand, and also these incredible granite rock shapes, and then some of these microscopic plants, and you start to realize that it's just such an incredible environment, and it's pretty delicate too, and you just get a real sense that this is an environment that most people don't ever get to see, and I was very lucky to see that. And I've always wanted to go back, actually, and go across the Sahara, and there's in some kind of expedition truck or a couple of motorbikes or whatever, and just have a good time and not be so much focused on a documentary.
I'd join you on a motorbike. I wouldn't do it like I did the first time, which is I ran 150 miles of it.
Yeah,
well, 151 miles, actually, in the Marathon des Sables, and you don't have much time to stop and smell the roses and not that there's any roses growing there. But actually, Morocco is my favourite country in the world to visit.
Yeah.
For me, it's such a... I love that desert environment that also then you'll be going along these trails for hours and miles, and then all of a sudden you turn a bend and there's this oasis of green hidden in amongst all the endless red dust and dirt and sand, and then you just see hundreds of houses along a river valley, and it just seems like such an alien world. I also love the way that Moroccan Islamic culture is presented to the world as well. It's so elegant, and the food's incredible.
I love Morocco too. I really, really had a nice time in Morocco. The food's amazing. It's like you say, those little oases, the culture, the colours, the tiles, everything. It's just really a really special place.
Yeah, it's really special.
Yeah.
So, you live in Bali now?
Yeah.
most of the time. What, you came here because of family and commitments and the likes, but you've been coming here for 12 years, did you say?
Yeah. My first trip was 12 years ago. Yeah.
So obviously our business is an environmental one. We're doing organic farming at the back here. We're picking up all the litter and the garbage, and we're doing our little bit to make Bali a better place. I've only been here a year and a half, and I've not really seen it with all the tourists. They're all starting to come back now. As we've seen, we went out for dinner a couple of nights ago, and there's restaurants are popping up literally in a week in places where before there was green paddy fields, and who knows what was living in those paddy fields. But what are the changes that you've seen here in the last 12 years? Because I know you've, as a cameraman, you have a different eye for things as well. You know, you probably notice in that attunement that we were talking about in the mountains and in the ocean, you're also attuned to visually to see things probably a bit more clearly and accurately than most.
Yeah, actually, I studied tourism at university as well. So
I saw that on your CV, but it took me so long to read through your CV. There's so much on it.
Yes, So I've always been intrigued about how tourism grows and you know, the benefits it has for the local population versus the not so good things when it starts to grow too fast or too far.
And this place is a victim of its own success, isn't it?
It is, and I think right now it's growing rapidly, very rapidly. But it always has actually, Mike. You know, even before I came, it was growing fast. So, you know, it went from Kuta to Ligian to Seminyak to, you know, Barawa to, it just kept, the movement of people and progress just keeps going further up the coast. And we've seen it here. We're in Sese today. And already there's new buildings popping up in the rice paddies. And you told me the other day I was always under the impression that Sese was going to be protected by the Banja. To be able to maintain some of these green areas. But
the Banja being the local, essentially like the council that runs its own area. I'm just explaining for people that don't know what that word means.
Yeah. But, you know, I think when you have such a disparity of income or currency, then money talks, you know, and money can change people. And they may have really good intentions to start with about, you know, keeping the green areas, but then a big wad of cash lands on the table, and that's starts to
changes not only their lives but probably their children and their grandchildren's lives as well.
Absolutely, you know, it kind of starts to bring them up a couple of pegs, but not very much, and not enough potentially for the amount of growth, because everything starts to get more expensive here. My fear is that because of the speed of the growth, the infrastructure can't keep up. And already we're seeing, you know, big pollution problems. Before Corona, we had some major pollution problems here, and then that starts to affect the user experience, the tourist experience, you know. And a lot of my friends are like, I'll never go back to Bali. It's just full of rubbish, and it's full of people trying to rip you off. And there was a time actually back in the 90s, I've been told that Bali used to be a really dangerous place to be. I don't sense that now at all. But
for me, it feels like the safest place I've ever lived.
Yeah, but I think when tourism first comes in, there's some people, locals, that do really well out of it, and some that don't, and then they get a little bit dark on it, and they, especially the procrastinators are the last ones to get on it. They try to find less savoury ways to make money off the tourists, and that leads to sort of a poor experience. You know, people getting mugged or whatever. And it used to be quite dangerous, and now there's so many expats that have made it home. And there's you know, tourism's been allowed to prosper here, and that it's kind of, you don't see so much of that anymore. But I just fear that user experience, that the tourist experience, might start to get a bit diluted as we see the return of people coming back in droves. Like any Southeast Asian country, you know, the government systems here are sometimes not as well organised as we're used to back home, and they let things slip a little bit more, and you know, you can always pay people off to have things done, and I think that infrastructure will really suffer. But thankfully, there's people, you know, bules or international people living here who have made it their home, and like yourself, are trying to make a change, and are trying to bring the locals up to speed, or help the locals with their own practice, or try to dissuade some of the poor practice that is going on with tourism, and
burning plastic, letting it go out into the ocean, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we come from a privileged position in that our own countries have done it years before, made the mess, and now we can stand on a box and start preaching. But I'm the last person to preach to anyone, but I think we have that experience to be able to say, hey, look, there is a better way of doing it. And actually, if you look at the increase in ecotourism and people's desire to go to places for the natural environment, not just for the cheap package deals and the cheap booze, Bali could be one of the places that people come to for ecotourism. Within a relatively short period of time, 10 years or so, you could transform the approach. But you're absolutely right about the garbage. I interviewed Tim Fajal on this podcast, and he read out a review from a French farmer who's an organic farmer who'd come over here to do the walk that Tim does. He walks through paddy fields 20 miles or something. You know Tim.
Yeah. And
Tim read this review, and the guy said, look, I'm totally aligned with the way you do your farming. It is everything. The natural environment in Bali was absolutely beautiful. The people are the friendliest, kindest. The temples, the ceremonies. The guy it is an incredible place. It was compliment after compliment. And then he said, but I will never come back, and I will never encourage anyone else to come to Bali because of the garbage. Yeah. My heart is sunk because of the garbage, seeing people burning it and seeing it in the rivers and the tributaries and in the piles. But it's a simple problem. It's not like we're saying you have to change the culture. You have to change one aspect of it, which is create a system to put in place and encourage people through education, like they did in the UK in the 80s when people threw garbage everywhere. I mean, my street looked like a tip. Poor area, but it still looked like a tip. You don't see litter there now, and that's because in the 80s the government did big campaigns around shaming people, essentially, that if you threw garbage in the street, it made you a lesser part of your community, which is true.
Do you know what's interesting, which just dawned on me now, is where our governments what they've done is they've managed to make it unvisible.
That's a good point. Yeah, so it's not like it's not there. It's just
there's monster loads of it sitting in a facility which is probably going to get packed and sent off to China.
No, they don't take it anymore. They don't take foreign wasters, from what I understand.
But we still have a massive...
They'll send it to Indonesia instead, yeah.
Whereas actually, in Indonesia, you get to see how much trash you're using because it's all around you.
Yeah.
I've been in India for 8 months before this, just a couple of weeks ago, and you go into some of these very poor areas, these ghettos, and there's just piles of rubbish just piling up, and then people are living around it. In fact, some of the houses are made out of rubbish, and that's a problem that just they cannot fix. They can probably stop using it, but that rubbish will just be there for eternity at this stage.
Yeah.
Whereas at least in Indonesia, there's a chance or a sense that we might be able to fix it, because it hasn't quite happened like India yet, and there may be a good chance, but we can see how much we're using. We can see how much the locals are using. And actually, to be quite honest, even though you see rubbish here, it's on a small scale to actually what we're using.
Yeah.
And, I went to Wandsworth Tip once. It's a very long story, but I went looking for something that accidentally got thrown away, and I just saw dozens and dozens and dozens of trucks coming in and pouring into this huge compaction system. And it was quite amazing. In London, how much trash.
Oh, yeah.
That we're
the
using.
average Londoner compared to the average Balinese person is probably a large family in Bali doesn't create the same amount of trash as the average single Londoner or Californian, or I don't know what the numbers are, but I'd imagine.
But the funny thing is like they're being picked on for, oh my God, the way they use plastic and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah.
When you look at what we do, I mean, our streets are nice and clean because it's just shipped away and sent somewhere else.
And we're also paying large amounts of taxes to have it all cleaned. Yeah. One final question, because it's getting hot in here. I'm going to need to fix the aircon. I'm quite proud of our podcast room that we've had built, but we definitely need to make it a bit cooler, don't we? But one final question. I was meant to ask it earlier, so it's a little bit out of any kind of sequence. But you've had arguably two of the most aspirational have two of the most aspirational dream jobs. One being a mountain guide, a heli-skiing guide, you bastard. Most of us skiers just dream of getting one heli-skiing trip in our lifetimes, and you've had thousands of the trips up and down mountains. And then the other is working as a very, very high-level director of photography, a cameraman. Cameraman sounds a little bit...
No, it's a cameraman.
It's a cameraman.
It's still a cameraman.
Yeah, but it's an artistic position.
Yeah.
Director of photography, that sums it up much more. But for people wanting to get into, to become working in your industry, what sort of advice would you give?
Shoot. Just shoot. Go out and shoot stuff.
Let's just be clear to any Americans listening. Shoot to a New Zealander has a very different. A cameraman has a very different meaning than.
Absolutely, yeah. I've caught myself out saying that before. I shoot people. They're like, "What? Really?"
What?
Yeah.
No,
not like that. No. Yeah, I mean, watching movies and being passionate about other people's work and being inspired, I think, is one of the first things to do. I think one of the worst things to do, and I think what happens now, it's led by a generation now of people who are looking at people's lives, the best version of their lives, through Instagram and some of the social medias, is they're seeing what it looks like to have a photo of being a cameraman.
What a big chunky
having
piece
a big
of equipment
camera,
on your shoulder.
holding a camera, and I would always like get.
Isn't that a guitar? What you just held there?
Yeah, I would always get my crew to like hold the camera, and then I'd go and hold their camera, or a tiny little camera, and then can I get a photo of your camera, because I think it's a bit silly. So I think the advice for me to give people is don't shoot for a show reel, shoot for the passion of the picture, and shoot for the passion of telling stories through your photography, and how important job you have doing that. Because if you're doing it for your show reel so that you can make money and meet famous people, you'll never be able to unlock the secrets of creativity and be right in the moment and be able to tell stories at a deeper level. I don't care for my show reel. You virtually won't see me online anywhere. I don't care for that. I don't have social media. I don't put that first. Maybe I should, and maybe I will, but it's not leading me first. I'm not going out guns blazing on a social media campaign to try to get as many likes as possible to try and get a big job with a famous director. In fact, even the biggest cinematographers in the world, or directors of photography, it's the same thing. They will still shoot short films for free. They'll still shoot passion projects. They'll still shoot little things on the side because they're passionate about pictures. And that's the most important thing. And I think that you can't really teach that. You have to feel it. When you're shooting documentary, you shoot with your ears. You're listening to people, you're listening, and you're watching, you're observing. You're not thinking about how good this is going to look on your show reel. And you're not thinking about how impressed the producer's going to be when you get back. You're thinking, how can I best tell the story of this amazing person I've got in front of me? And you've got to listen and tune in. And that's what I really like. You're shooting on the fly as well. So you've got to make very rapid decisions, and you've also got to be good with people. And all of those come together. And sometimes you can just make the camera go away. And it's not even about the camera. Yes, I do have the best camera in the world, and I have all the best gear in the world, but that's only because of the types of jobs I do now. But I can quite happily shoot it on an iPhone if I have to, and still have the same level of excitement. So that's the first thing, is just go out and shoot and be passionate about it and be inspired by other people's work. And then eventually you'll find your own style and your own way to tell stories. And the other thing is, just be humble and listen. When I first started out, I would tell people, "Oh yeah, I can do that, I can do this, I can do," And after a while, I started meeting these heroes and as cinematographers, and I've done a couple of master classes at the American Society of Cinematographers. And the first thing I noticed is they don't say much. They're just humble, and they just listen. And that's a really big skill, just to listen and tune in. What is the director trying to say? How can I tell the story visually with the paintbrushes I have? How can I best serve the script right, for the writer's script? with visually, and that's why you do it. There's something in the collaboration that when it all comes together, it just feels magic. Whereas if you're out there going, oh, it's going to look amazing for me, I'm going to be such a hero at the end of this, I'm going to get bigger jobs, I'm going to get a paycheck, and then you're doing it for all the wrong reasons, So
I think that's good advice on life, is to continuously look at where you can add more and more value, and then it comes back. And it's kind of the golden rule here in Bali, isn't it, with karma?
Yeah.
Do as you want to be done unto yourself.
I agree.
Any questions I should have asked you? Any deep, dark secrets that need to be revealed?
No, I think we got through quite a bit of it.
We've been cracking on for an hour and a half now. It only took us 24 hours to get set up, but I think that was worth every minute of it.
I hope it wasn't too boring for you guys out there.
No, it was amazing. Let's go and grab some lunch.
All right. Thanks,
mate.
Mike. Appreciate it.
Bye.